Today, the low rate syndrome. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, working on this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined again by Steve from Canstar. Hi Steve.
G'day Martin.
How are you going?
Oh, terrific, thank you. Hot though, summer's here.
Yeah, we've had a lot of lurking heat the last few days. A lot of lurking heat in some of the areas of the property market and things, but ultra low rates, and they're here to stay, aren't they?
Oh, they are chilly rates, all right, and they are here to stay. There's no reprieve in sight. The Reserve Bank governor is saying, look, 2 years at best before rates will start going up. So there's nothing that can really force rates up from here.
Mm-hmm. And of course, he did make mention this week of responding also to what other central bankers were doing around the world in other locations. So it isn't just a local problem, it's a global syndrome in terms of rates will be low, ever lower, and maybe even negative in some places. But it really creates huge issues for savers. We've discussed this a couple of times, but I think we should revisit it because, of course, we've noticed recently that, once again, rates have been cut even more.
Yeah, they have. The Reserve Bank did cut by 0.15 at the beginning of November. On Cup Day, actually, yeah. And so 0.15 off, the banks responded by lowering their rates by about 0.2, sometimes 0.515, but nevertheless, they did lower them. Now, that's inevitable, frankly. I mean, if the whole hierarchy of interest rates is falling, well, so will rates for savers. Had to happen, and it did happen. But it's really on top of massive decreases over the past 12, 18 months.
Yeah, and this begs the really thorny question, right? Because there will be some people who will say, well, I'm going to accept lower rates, but I'm going to have to dial back my spending as a result of that. But others might actually be taking Phil Lowe's recommendation to expose themselves to market risks to try and get a better return. But of course, those risks are huge.
Well, they are huge, and the problem that a lot of those people have is that they're living off this, they're retirees. They don't get a second chance. If the market falls by 15%, 20%, which it can well do and has done in the past, then they are still needing to spend their savings on living. And frankly, they don't get a chance to recover. They take it out at the bottom. It's not like somebody who's 25 or 30 can leave money in the market and the market recovers and they don't really notice it long term. Retirees have to pull the money out, they're living off it, and they never get it back.
No, and the risk is that you think you're doing the right thing tactically and then strategically you realise that you're stranded, and the difficulty is you run out of runway quite quickly if things go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, you do. I mean, if the 20% fall means you've got 4/5 of the money you thought you had, and that 4/5 you're going to start drawing on that so that you don't get a second chance, and you do it runs down quickly. You'll be living off principal because there's no interest to talk about, and it will run your savings down rapidly.
And just to give people a bit of a context, in the UK, they've been in very low rate territory since 2010, right? And over there, there are an ever greater number of people who are into retirement and beyond, who are now really finding it impossible to continue to live in any style that they expected to live. And of course, their rates are still low and will be low for a long time too. So the point to make is this is not necessarily a short, sharp dip and then a recovery in rates, right? People have to be thinking, what if rates stay low for 5 to 10 years, right? And that should determine what people might or should do.
Look, rates, I believe, will be low for that sort of time. 10 years seems a long, long time, so you never say never. Rates will surely go up in that term. But 5 years is conceivable that, with this recovery, we're going to recover more rapidly than I thought, I suspect, from the COVID problem. The signs are pretty positive. There'll be bumps on the way, but it's going to be a long time before we get all of those jobs back, before we get to inflation. And you need inflation if you're going to have higher rates. So rates will be low for a long time, and people will have to say, look, I don't have to just weather a storm out. This is the way it's going to be for a good part of my retirement, and I've got to plan accordingly.
And those thoughts will be quite alien to many people, right? Because the old theory was, well, I accumulate wealth when I'm working, and I then have enough of a nest egg and enough of a return from that nest egg to be able to see me through, into retirement and right to the end of my, natural life, as it were.
Yeah.
This is becoming a crisis. And in fact, I see that in my surveys already, that there are perhaps 3 million people who are partially or fully reliant on income from savings accounts, particularly term deposits. And it's so clear they are really dialing back their spending.
Yeah, they are. They absolutely are. And there is probably no choice, but they do have to say, look, I expected to be leaving a reasonably sizable bucket of money there for my children when I pass on. Frankly, I think people will have to reappraise that and say, I will plan to run this savings down over the next 20 years. And at that point, I'll have to go onto a pension. And that's what I think we're going to see. It's an inevitable outcome of this. And of course, the whole superannuation program was introduced to get people off pensions, to stop that reliance on the younger generation. Well, unfortunately, this is a setback in that whole social plan. And we'll have to say, well, look, there will be more people going onto the pension than we expected a few years back.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And, I'm seeing some of that again in my surveys, that people who thought they were going to be able to comfortably manage their retirement under their own resources are now really looking at that quite hard. And, of course, there's the old argument, well, you've still got the family home, which is an asset that you can perhaps bite into as well with a reverse mortgage. But even that is also, covering a whole bunch of risks too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are risks. I mean, one of the biggest risks is that, frankly, you will have to change your lifestyle at a point in time. And if it means a couple both moving into a nursing home, well, there might not be enough equity left in your family home to actually pay the deposit in the nursing home, and you'll end up taking whatever's on offer, not your choice of nursing home. Now, I think that's the major risk with reverse mortgages. Yeah, you need to talk to your family and say, look, you'll be getting less, I'm taking out this loan, but that's something that, I guess the next generation will just have to accept. But it's that risk that you'll lose control when you do have to move out of the family home.
Yeah, and of course, at that later stage in life, people are often less well equipped physically and mentally to be able to deal with those sorts of challenges.
Oh, look, they're horrendous issues. I mean, anyone who's had a relative go into a nursing home knows that it's not an environment they like. They've lost all of their independence. Suddenly they're being treated like children, like grade oneers being told where they should go and when. And nobody likes that. Nobody wants that to happen, but it just becomes a necessity in some cases. So that's stressful enough. But if you pile the extra stress of I have no choice about where I live, I've got to live in one of the state-owned institutions, well, that adds to it. And if you've got financial woes as well, you've got to repay that reverse mortgage, well, that's horrendous. You're piling stress upon stress upon stress, and people kind of think these should be the golden years.
Yeah, well, I fear that, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable for that particular segment of the market. But there's another segment too, those who are contributing to superannuation, right? Because in a market where rates are low, the chances are superannuation returns are also going to be lower.
Yeah, well, rates are low for a reason, and they're low because the economy is in trouble. So, it seems like great news for borrowers, but it never is. Moderate rates are great. The Goldilocks rate, that's wonderful. Super high rates are horrendous, and low rates are really scary because it means you've got high unemployment, low growth in the economy, no inflation, and And you really, a lot of business decisions work in inflationary times. And those same decisions made when there's no inflation to cover up slight mistakes mean that people lose money, businesses fail, a lot of jobs are lost. And that's the environment you've got when you've got these super, super low rates.
And of course, the other point there is that most superannuation funds charge fees, and the fees can become a much larger proportion of the total gross returns from the superannuation fund, which essentially means you end up with less than you might have expected as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the most significant fees tend to be a percentage based on the sum, so it doesn't really affect that. But there are still membership fees that you pay that tend to be flat, and they're the ones that become exaggerated as balances start being a bit stressed. However, I think the people who are in accumulation phase, that in other words, still contributing and in the workforce, in the strongest position through this, relative to anyone who's in a pension fund and mainly in cash.
And then, of course, you've got those perhaps saving a deposit for a first time buy a home, and of course the rates you earn on those savings are also a lot lower, so it's much more difficult to save the deposit that you perhaps were hoping to access.
All of the heavy lifting has to be done by you at the moment. If you can only receive a 0.5 interest rate on your savings, that will not help at all, frankly, in reaching your goal of deposit towards the house. So all the heavy lifting has to come straight out of your household budget. So no free kicks there.
No, and that's of course why some first home buyers are now beginning to jump at the chance to get that free money from the government, be it the home builder grant or whatever it is, or the 95% mortgage or whatever, as a way of getting into the market. We're seeing that, of course, being quite popular at the moment. The latest figures came out yesterday. But there are some risks attached to that too, aren't there?
Well, yeah, there are. I mean, you can get into the housing market with almost no savings at the moment. You can get into a 95% loan where the government guarantees the extra bit. And if you're building in particular, you can pick up the $25,000 grant from Commonwealth, and most of the states have some other form of grant. So you pick up about $40,000, you pay almost no stamp duty, and the government, and you don't have to pay lender's mortgage insurance because the government is guaranteeing it. So you can get in with almost no savings, but of course you have almost no equity as well, and that 5% will disappear incredibly quickly if you actually do have a correction in the property market. So you could end up in a house where you have a loan that is worth more than the house is worth. That's not a very good feeling. It puts you in a very vulnerable position if you lose a job as well. So they're the risks that come with that. Interestingly, the Reserve Bank governor came out the other day and said, look, he thinks that it's a great time to buy. And he said, I don't think prices are going up a lot anytime soon. But he didn't actually deal with the risk that prices might fall and stay low for a few years. And if that happens, I think those people who've really got in on 5% will start they'll be nervous, and they might be a bit cranky in some cases where they, whatever they have worked hard to save has disappeared. So, yeah, I think the risks are pretty huge. And I think, I'm looking at property price and thinking, will it still happen? I think there still will be a bit of a correction down. I don't think it'll be as deep as we thought originally, and I don't think it will be sustained. But you don't know is the fact. And if you can hold out a couple of years, maybe you're better off. But it's very tempting to jump in now because we're seeing fear of missing out coming back into the psyche.
Yes, well, actually, FOMO is really stalking the halls at the moment. Unfortunately, I see that in my surveys too. And, of course, people have this wired expectation that property prices always go up. In fact, half of the people in my survey say they go up every 7 years, religiously. Like
double every 7 years.
Used
to be.
Well, maybe, but that was a one-off situation over a certain period where there was deregulation, rates were high and they came down. The bank's lending standards were very much watered down as well. All of those cards have now been played. And given the fact that we've got low international migration, or none at the moment, in fact, international buyers looking less likely to come back into the market, and of course property investors standing on the sidelines too, the supply-demand profile for property is really very different now, which is one of the reasons why I'm with you, Steve. I think that there may be a little bit of movement up, movement down, but nothing like we saw over the previous generation.
Yeah, that's right. I've always been very bullish on property, and I've looked at institutions like APRA and thought at various times, look, I think you're being way too conservative. I've looked at some of the international commentators talking about how geared we are to property in Australia, and I think, I think that's okay. And I still think it is longer term, but we have hit this moment in time where, and it's been underpinned by migration. That's what's underpinned the whole thing. Migration, tourism, foreign students all coming into the country. That's what's driven property prices in Australia. Those three things are off the agenda at the moment. And we can see that in high vacancy rates, in particular inner city Melbourne and Sydney, and low property prices. And one of the really interesting indicators that there is still nervousness about is that the one group who haven't jumped into the housing market and the borrowing market, the data came out yesterday, so we saw it again, investors. Investors are the group that are sitting on the sideline. Now, why are they sitting on the sideline? One, because they're not sure they'll be able to rent the place out because there are high vacancies, but secondly, because they still wonder if there is a property correction, a price correction coming. And they'll say, I'll buy after a correction, or I'll just hold fire until I can see that the market is, that the spare capacity has been worked out of the market. So low vacancies. I don't think we'll see them coming back for a little while. And they're only about, I think investors were only about 3% ahead of 12 months ago, whereas the rest of the market has just boomed.
Well, it's interesting, again, in my surveys, a lot of property investors are not getting positive returns on their current portfolio, right? And the number who are signalling that they may well put their property on the market in the first half of next year continues to rise. So it's not just no new property investors coming into the market, but we've also got some property investors thinking, well, maybe I should get out while I can and release the equity, because I've got a little bit of equity because prices have moved up slightly, and just capitalize on that because, again, long-term expectations are very different now. So I do think we're in a very different environment, very low rates, probably relatively static home prices, and lots of conundrums for all segments of the population, to be frank, whether you're saving to buy, whether you're actually in property now, or whether you're actually in retirement. This just shows you, I think, the complexity of the current environment that we're in.
Look, it does. We've spent the last 10 years, probably almost 20 years, where almost everybody with reasonable equity in the house they're living in has gone and used that equity to buy an investment property, and they've negatively geared it. And it seemed, and still, I still look at that strategy and think longer term it'll work. But you're dead right. A lot of those people have never been through a downturn. And they've looked at this and said, oh my gosh, we are struggling here. We don't have a tenant. We've got to repay this loan, and we're struggling with our own income being cut back as well. So plenty of people will be saying, I need to get out of this. I can't handle the stress of this again. So that will happen. There'll be more property coming onto the market. There'll also be property coming onto the market because, unfortunately, we'll get another round of unemployment when JobKeeper stops. So there will have to be property coming onto the market. And I wouldn't be surprised if at that point we end up with oversupply and prices starting to fall. Now, I still don't think they're going to fall 10% anymore. I kind of at the start of COVID thought, 10% wouldn't surprise me a little bit. But 5% is kind of very easily kind of anticipated. No one's going to be shocked at that.
Yeah, no, I think you and I see it the same way, Steve. And I've said that I think we're still in the foothills of the recovery, and the journey is going to be quite complex over the next 2 or 3 years. Of course, after the global financial crisis, the peak of property price falls, and in fact, delinquencies hit in year 3 and 4. So it's going to take some time to work through. And therefore, I think people should be relatively cautious and careful, and frankly, do the maths on the cash flow and their finances, and really make sure that they're making sensible decisions, not just tactically, but also strategically as well.
Yeah, I think a little bit of conservatism is rewarded, and it's if you're a first home buyer, look at it's so hard to stay out because there's so much incentive, and if you get Reserve Bank governors saying great time to buy, and you are worried about prices taking off because of these early signs, well, incredibly tempting. And in the longer term, provided they don't lose their job, it will probably work out well. But sometimes if you can just hold and just wait and think, I'll keep saving for another year and I'll have another $20,000, $40,000 or whatever, I might be a lot better off. What I've always said to people is get all of your ducks lined up, know where you want to live, the style of place you want to live in, know how much you'll have to pay, how much you've got, have spoken to the bank about how much you can borrow. So you've got all of the ducks lined up so that if things do start moving fast, you can get in early, not late. But I think right now is not a bad time for that little bit of conservatism. And the writing will be on the wall. I think government won't just pull the incentives overnight. They'll sort of give reasonable notice on incentives. So I think you might still have time if you can just sit on your hands for a bit. But no one's got a crystal ball. The other thing about that, when you were talking about that, it just reminded me of something else. I hear people talk about, recession's over, as if let's go out and party, recession's over. And it is technically because we had 3% growth. But that's just a technical measure. When an economy falls by 10%, and it does a couple of quarters, you're in recession. When it recovers by 3% out of that 10, you're not in recession, but it sure feels like it because that's not going to replace all those jobs that were lost. So, I kind of look at measures of recession and think, you know what, it's really unemployment that matters, not growth in GDP.
Well, and that's right, Steve. And of course, the expectation is that unemployment will be higher than it was before the virus hit for at least 2 or 3 years. And that tells you something about the trajectory of the journey forward.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Reserve Bank governor is saying it will get worse before it gets better. So, at 7% now, we'll probably see 8%. We could even see worse. And he's saying, and it'll be another 2 years after that before we get back down to the sort of, well, at best, before we get back to what we kind of consider full employment, which is probably somewhere between 4 and 5%.
And he did say, of course, as a result of that, don't expect any wage increases above inflation for the next 2 or 3 years either.
Yeah, and inflation's running at 0.5.
Exactly. So no real income growth. And look, a lot of people got out of jail in the early 2000s because they got strong income growth, right? That formulation doesn't appear to me to be here this time.
No, it's not. Look, there'll be sectors that come on, as there always are, and some sectors are going to do a lot worse than the average. But the average worker is not going to find that they get there. It will be a crawl, just a crawl. So don't expect that to be you get out of jail free card, because we saw this. We have seen this problem. We've stopped talking about the interest only loans coming through, but the get out of jail free card for interest only borrowers was supposed to be wage inflation, and they haven't had it. So they still can't afford to pay off the loan. It's the same issue here. Inflation papers over a lot of the cracks, and we don't have them. We don't have inflation at the moment.
No, well, Steve, I appreciate your insights once again. And in the low rate world that we're in, we have to think differently, don't we?
Well, we do, and we look at this. We did a survey as well. We do our pulse survey every year, and 47% of people still have their money and most of their savings in the bank account. And chances are they're earning well below 1%. Chances are they're earning 0.5%, provided they qualify for the bonuses, because most of those people are with the big four banks. So they haven't changed that behaviour. And some of them have it in investing. They're in the market. 6% have it in cash. So that's in the mattress, effectively. 9% have TDs. So between term deposits and savings accounts, 56%. So they have more or less accepted that, well, interest rates are low and there's not much I can do about it. My view is a little different from that. I think people do need to say, look, I need to balance my thinking here and have some in high risk, well, not high risk assets, but middle risk assets, blue chip stocks that are paying dividends, and some in cash, as in deposits, savings, so that if there is a correction, they live off the cash, don't diminish, don't have to sell shares at the wrong time. I think that's kind of the only defence that I can see, because there are a whole lot of other, you can go into property trusts, you can go into peer-to-peer lending, you can do a whole lot of stuff, but all of it comes with a lot more risk than money in the bank. So I think you just need to use some balance here. There's not one and only one solution, there's a mix.
Yeah, well, they often say spread your risks, Steve. I think that's particularly appropriate now. Thanks for your time today, and we'll put the links to Canstar below.
Excellent, good. Thanks, Martin. I enjoyed it as always.
Talk to you again. Cheers, bye.